Hello and welcome to the second in the series for Elevate Greater Manchester's collaboration with Use. We're doing a series of 3 how-to videos. Hopefully you'll already have seen the one on personal branding. This one is focusing on public speaking, and the third in the series is on networking. They do all work as standalone videos, so if you've not already seen the personal branding one, don't worry, you don't need it for this to make sense, but the three of them do work quite well as a series. So I will go on to introduce myself fully in just a moment. But just wanted to show you this first. Apologies, just trying to get onto the right screen for you here. There we go. So wanted to call this how to make yourself heard rather than how to be a better public speaker, or some of those other kind of titles that we see, because I think we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be a good public speaker, that we put ourselves into a box as to what we think that looks like, what kind of skills, what kind of impression we want to give. And actually, for me, the skill of public speaking is just doing whatever it takes to make yourself heard. That's not about shouting the loudest, it's about putting your message across in the most effective way. And hopefully when you think of it that way, that it's about putting a message across, that takes off some of the stress and some of the expectations as to what a good public speaker looks like. So we are going to go through those public speaking tips and tricks, we absolutely are, but we're going to keep coming back to this idea of it being around getting that message across and actually making yourself heard. So as I mentioned, my name's Ilona. I'm the co-founder of Elevate Greater Manchester. We're a new business development consultancy based here, as you would expect, in Greater Manchester. And one of the things we're really passionate about is raising the visibility of individuals and organisations. And obviously public speaking is a huge part of that. And actually once you start to get the knack of it and you get used to it, it's a really easy way of ramping up that level of visibility within the business community. So those of you who've been have listened to the personal branding session that I did will have seen this slide before. I'm not going to go through it in masses of detail this time, but the reason that I've got those things on there is to give you a broader idea of who I am, what goes into my personality, what my personal professional life looks like. And that is important even when just talking around public speaking, that we don't forget our personality, we don't forget what our personal brand is, we don't forget all those different things that make us who we are. Very often when you see somebody on stage and they're nervous, they lose a lot of that stuff that they have naturally. You kind of feel like you have to stick to a particular topic that you're talking about, and you don't necessarily mention some of the things that make you seem a little bit more human. So thought it was important that we included those things in this presentation as well. Where I will go into a little bit more detail is on that public speaking bit. Why should you listen to me about being a good public speaker? You know, what do I know? What have I got to share with you? And I suppose the big thing for me is that I am not a natural public speaker. I'm sure there are people out there who are. I am not one of them. I was a nervous public speaker. I would do pretty much anything to get out of public speaking. And as I've mentioned numerous times before, it is because of an organisation called JCI that started to change. It's a voluntary, not-for-profit development organisation, and I was regularly put into situations where it was, why don't you just welcome the trainer for this session, and why don't you just say a few words on this? And then in 2014 I took on the role of local president of JCI Sheffield, and that's when this really started to change for me, that I was regularly having to introduce events, and I had to do a speech at our annual dinner. And I remember being so nervous about doing that I actually rearranged the format of the evening, because I knew that I would be too scared to even think about eating until after I'd done my speech. So rather than waiting until after everyone had eaten to do all of the speeches, I moved it round so I could slot mine in after the starter and get it out of the way a little bit earlier. And people who listened to me then had no idea that I was nervous, and we're going to chat about nerves in a few moments, but for me that was a terrifying experience, and I knew that I wanted to keep pushing myself out my comfort zone. I wanted to get to a point where I didn't have those crippling nerves. I wanted to feel more confident as a public speaker. I wanted to be able to take advantage of some of the opportunities that I was potentially shying away from because I didn't want to stand on stage. So it was also in 2014 that I was part of JCI UK's debate team, and we made the European finals. In 2015, I won the JCI UK public speaking competition. In 2016, I competed in Finland as part of the JCI Europe competition, and came second in that. And that then helped me massively in my day-to-day life, that I could start to take advantage of those opportunities, and that having been standing on stage in front of so many people who were literally judging me, it took a lot of the pressure off. Being able to host events, host conferences, I host the Northwest Charity Awards, and I know that I've been in job interviews where I've been given the job directly as a result of the presentation that I did at the start of that interview. So it's something that has continued to raise my visibility and to improve my standing in the professional community, and that kind of links on to the trainer bullet point that you say there. Public speaking is one of the main things that I train on. Seeing the difference that it makes to people, and to have that basic level of confidence in public speaking is just huge and is massively rewarding. There's just a little bit of background noise here, so I'm just going to close that over. Hopefully that wasn't too distracting for you there. So that's given you hopefully a little bit of a sense of who I am before we get started. So nerves, this is the one thing that comes back time and time and time again when I say to people, how do you feel about public speaking? I'm just really nervous. I just want to be able to get over the nerves to be able to do it. I don't know why I'm nervous. I know that I could speak to all of these people one-on-one and I'd be absolutely fine. But the thought of doing it in a public speaking situation, even if that's just presenting around a boardroom, fills me with terror. I start shaking, I forget what I'm going to say, perhaps start to go quite red and quite flushed, and I just don't know why it is, because rationally, I know that nothing that terrible is going to happen. And when we've done surveys, public speaking consistently comes out as one of our top few fears. It comes above all the things that could actually kill us. And that seems quite strange. You know, why is it that we have this complete terror of something that actually nothing really very bad can happen to us? And the reason is that our minds have not evolved at the same speed as society. Our physical body is pretty much the same as it was hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago. It's minimal changes to our physical bodies, and that includes your brain. So your brain does not know that it's not living in the jungle, that it's not living out as part of a tribe. You know, all of those basic physiological things are exactly the same. So if you put yourself in a situation where you're away from your tribe, you're standing out on your own, that is a really dangerous place to be, okay? You are the person that's going to get eaten by the saber-toothed tiger. You're the person that's going to get attacked by a neighbouring tribe. It's a really dangerous place to be. And so when you put yourself on stage and you're in that position of standing out completely on your own, that is the physical response that your body still has, okay? And that is a good thing. That is why the human race is still alive, okay? If we liked that feeling, we would probably have been killed off quite quickly, okay? There is safety in numbers. We like being in our group. So I'm not telling you this to be like, oh, okay, that's fine. It's a life or death situation. My body's doing all the right things, so I'm just never going to do it, okay? That's not the point of this. The point is that you need to accept your body is trying to do the right thing for you, and then you need to help it, okay? So we can't talk ourselves out of such a strong evolutionary response. You can't just tell yourself it's all okay and expect it all to be fine. So you need to physically take your body out of that. So if you can just imagine for me, and if you're standing up watching this, you can actually kind of give it a whirl. When I do training in person, I make everybody stand up and do it. Think about when you're nervous, so maybe it is that moment getting on stage, maybe it's when something bad's happened, you've been called in to see a boss, a client wants to see you and you're fairly sure it's not going to be a positive conversation, that you start having that real nerves. Okay, so you fold in on yourself a little bit, you maybe start to not be able to breathe as well as you could before, really hunched in, really close, start to feel a bit shaky. And that is the adrenaline and the cortisol, okay, your stress hormones. That's that fight or flight response, because you're putting your body in a really dangerous situation. Okay, so what you need to do is just literally step out of that. Okay, so head up, shoulders back, nice deep breaths, and then do what I like to call the Wonder Woman pose, your superhero pose, your hands on hips, shoulders back, nice deep breaths, big smile. You're going to feel a bit ridiculous, and that's fine. It's just going to make you feel a little bit lighter, a little bit happier. Okay, so just physically smiling and opening up releases those endorphins, your dopamine, your serotonin, your happy chemicals. Your body will respond, okay, because you're putting your body into a position that's happy and confident and open. That will start to be the case. Okay, we've taken it out of that stressful place and into a happy, confident place. So you can physically trick your body into giving you those right kind of chemicals that you need. Obviously, I am not for 1 second suggesting that you walk into the middle of a stage and say, bear with me one moment, Wonder Woman pose, deep breath, and I'm ready to go. But find somewhere that you can do that in the venue. I've literally done this behind a pop-up banner before. You can do it in a toilet cubicle, find a quiet room, find somewhere that you can go through, that you can do your breathing. Make sure we're getting nice deep breaths, we're getting plenty of oxygen in there, we're physically calming the body down, so that when we're then ready to go on stage, we're in a much more confident stance. And the more that you do this, I spoke a little bit before about constantly pushing myself out of that comfort zone. The more that you do it, you can start to retrain your brain a little bit. So rather than having no frame of reference and going into this panic, it can start to think, oh, okay, actually, like, we did this before and everything was fine, and we did this before and everything was fine. And we'll start to build up those chains so that when you step out onto stage, it has a frame of reference of every other time you stepped on stage before, and it was a great experience, and we know it's going to be fine again. So find those opportunities to be able to practice, to be able to get over your nerves. If the first time you have to do a presentation is in front of a really important potential client, you're going to be fairly panicked and nervous. Okay, so find yourself safe audiences, practice, film yourself, watch yourself back, do it in front of friends and family. Find organisations like JCI, like Toastmasters, that you can go and practice this, and people can give you feedback before you do the one that really counts. That's, it's your job on the line, it's a particular win on the line. Get yourself used to doing things so that you can go into those naturally more stressful situations without bringing all your public speaking nerves with you. And remember that good enough is good enough. We have so much pressure on ourselves in all areas of our lives that things have to be perfect, that it has to be, the best that it can possibly be. And actually, sometimes good enough is literally just good enough. I quite often think of public speaking in a similar way to how I think about running. If you said to somebody, I'm going to run a marathon, they're like, well, okay, cool. When are you planning on doing this? And like, well, I've never run before. I don't think I'm very good at it. So I've signed up and I'm going to run a marathon in 3 weeks' time. They would quite rightly think that you were crazy. They would probably point out that this is not the way to run. Okay, we don't go from not being able to do it at all to expect to be able to turn up, run a marathon, get some elite time for it. Okay, that's just not how it works. We accept that we need to train our bodies into it, that, maybe we want to do a couch to 5k program. Okay, maybe our first aim is just to be able to run to the end of the road and back without stopping. might want to get a 10k race in first, we might want to do a half marathon first. We may never end up actually running that full marathon. We might be quite happy that if we can get out and run 10k's as and when we feel like it, that's as good a runner as we want to be. Okay, it doesn't mean I'm not a runner, it just means I found my distance, I'm happy with what I can do, and that's fine. That's all I need to be able to do. So taking that back then to public speaking, what is good enough for you? Okay, we're not all going to be on stage at TED, okay, we're not all going to be Barack Obama, okay. We don't have to be this hugely inspirational, perfect public speaker that millions of people are going to watch, okay? We just have to be good enough that we can get through a boardroom meeting without panicking and we can get our point across, okay? That we can get through a pitch to a client, that we can describe what we do to people, do through our business in a variety of different situations. That if we're invited to take part in a panel discussion or to host an award ceremony, that we're happy to be able to accept that opportunity and get up on stage and get through and do that job and be happy with it. So work out what it is for you that's good enough. And once you're happy with that, then maybe you look at the next stage and you build up and you put an extra challenge in. Don't think that we have to go from a standing start to elite marathon level. That's not how this is going to work. So take that pressure off yourself, work out what you actually have to do. And it comes back to this idea that I mentioned at the beginning about it's making yourself heard, it's getting your message across. So what is it that you need to be able to do to get your message across? And that's probably not Martin Luther King standards of public speaking, okay? You know, as good as you may end up being as public speaking, it is unlikely that any of us are going to have our speeches studied by school children in years to come and watched by millions. So set realistic targets, achieve those, and then move on to the next session. One of the sessions that I've run a few times is around this idea of there's 5 key questions that will help you to plan any speech. This came about because I don't actually write anything down. I sometimes scribble a few little ideas, maybe do some research, but if I'm going to deliver a speech, so something perhaps a competition speech or a presentation in an interview, I don't go into it with notes. And that's not that I've written my speech out and memorised it, is that I've never actually written it all down. That works for me, it works with my brain. I can go out for a run, I can think things through, and I practice it over in my head, and I practice it in front of the mirror and on camera, and then I remember it. And it will vary slightly every time that I deliver it, but all the key stuff's there. Other people will never work in that way. They would much rather have it written down and then memorise it, or they will have key bullet points that they will then memorise and do it that way. But the fact that all of that process happens in my head means that it was quite difficult for me to work out what my process was in planning it. And it was only actually when my husband asked me what he should do to be able to prepare for a speech he had to give at work that I needed to take a step back and try and work out what that process was that I'd been doing internally. And it actually falls quite nicely into these 5 questions. They're not big questions, which is why I haven't put them all down on here, and you'll see that as we go through. So the very first question that I want you to ask is who? Okay, so not just who you are, but actually who is the audience? It's an absolutely fundamental question, and if you think about the best and worst presentations that you've sat through, a lot of it traces back to how well this question was addressed. Okay, was the speech appropriate for the audience? Okay, if you've sat through things where you felt patronised, or where it's gone completely over your head, where someone was telling jokes that you just didn't find funny, where people assumed an interest or a level of knowledge that you just didn't have, that is because they got the who wrong. So think about who your audience is going to be. Now, it may be that you know specifically who the actual people in the room are going to be, in which case you've got a whole wealth of knowledge about them. It may be that you're walking out on stage in front of 2,000 people and you don't know any of them individually. But you can still answer this question by understanding, why are they in the room? You know, is it because they're all part of a certain organisation? Is it because you're all part of a similar industry? Why is it that they're in the room? Who are they likely to be? And for those of you who have listened to the personal branding session that I did, think about what types of personalities are likely to be in that room. So yes, there will be huge variances, and I'm talking here slightly in terms of stereotypes, but we could imagine, for example, that a conference for accountants would attract a very different personality type to a conference for creative freelancers. Okay, so think about what you might be able to glean from the types of jobs that these people do. Once you understand then a little bit more about who they are and run that through in your head, think about who the key person in that audience is going to be. We can almost kind of do it as if it's going to be a conversation. I always say that any kind of speech is still a conversation, okay? It doesn't matter if you're the only person actually talking, it is still a conversation. There is still somebody on the other side listening and responding to what you are saying. And then bring that who in for you as well. So those labels that I mentioned at the beginning, you know, what is it that makes me me? Have I brought that to my speech? If I write a speech and I can give it to 20 different people and they can all deliver it exactly as well as I can, then I haven't written the best speech for me. There should be something in that that brings part of my personality, part of my specific skills, my specific experience, that means that only I could have given the speech that well. And sometimes people will come to me with the speech that they've been given and ask for my help in presenting that. And it's really difficult. And what I have done on occasion has been like, do we have to use this? Okay, could we actually just rip it up and start again, and start with who you are, who the audience is, and then start building a speech that's right for that conversation. You'll be much more comfortable delivering it, and hopefully the audience will be much more comfortable receiving it. The second question is why? Why is it that you are giving this particular speech? Okay, there may be some very practical reasons here, because you want to get a new job, because you've been told by your boss that you have to do this, because the client's asked you to come in and deliver something. But think about what the key purpose of that speech is. So there are three key purposes to every speech that you'll hear, and they are to inform, to persuade, and to entertain. So to inform, think about a lot of lectures, a lot of training videos. The ultimate aim of that speech is that the knowledge of the presenter is passed on to the audience. Okay, it doesn't really matter how much you enjoy it. That's not what we're aiming for here. I don't necessarily need you to go and do anything different. I just need you to have that knowledge. So think about every time you sit down on an aeroplane in the days when we were allowed to do these things, what was important is that you know what the safety information is. Okay, when you listen to somebody going through health and safety information, I just need you to know this stuff. Okay, I'm passing on information. Perhaps the most common one that we'll see is to persuade. Okay, so I want you to buy something, I want you to think something, I want you to do something. Okay, I want to persuade you. So politicians want to persuade you to vote for them. Salesperson wants to persuade you to buy from them. Charities want to persuade you to donate to them. Activists want to persuade you to change your behaviour. Okay, so all of those different things are an element of persuasion. And then the final one, which is quite rare, is where the sole purpose of the speech is to entertain. Okay, so the main thing that I want to do here is to entertain you. So a stand-up comedian. Okay, I want to entertain you. If I'm not entertaining you, I'm probably not a very good comedian. A best man speech, they're there as an entertaining part of the day. They want people to laugh. They want people to enjoy what they're doing. That's the main purpose of that speech. A lot of speeches will have elements of them in, but it's important that we understand what the key purpose is. So if I'm trying to sell you something, I'm very clearly in that persuade category. But in persuading you, I will probably give you some information and I might try to entertain you, but they're not the key focus. So be clear about what the key purpose is and then drill down to what is the key message. Okay, so coming back to that idea of you want to be heard, you want to get your message across, understand what that key message is. One of the best tricks that I was given, and this is back in the days when Twitter was a little more restrictive than it is now, was that you should be able to tweet the core message of your speech. So 140 characters in those days. What is the key message? If the audience take nothing else away from anything that I've said, what is that one key message? Get that key message very clear, very concise, and then we'll be able to build the speech around it. So we know who we're giving it to and we know why we're giving that speech. Then think about where you're giving this speech. So when I've done this before, I've kind of briefly mentioned the online, offline differences. We're going to come on to that as a slightly different section, just because we are now in a world where so much has moved online and so much will potentially be a blended experience. So I'm not going to cover the online stuff here. So when you're thinking about where, think about the size of the room, think about the stage. Is there a lectern? Is there a microphone? All of this stuff might seem a bit irrelevant before you start actually creating your speech, but try and envisage where you're going to deliver it. Is this something that's going to be delivered sitting down around a board table? Is this something that's going to be delivered standing on stage in front of 2,000 people? Is this something that's going to be delivered to a local audience, you know, a hyper-local audience potentially? You know, is this a local council meeting? Is it something that's slightly broader than that, that's got a regional audience? Has it got a national audience? Has it got an international audience? Are you delivering this in a different country? That will impact who your audience is, whether you can use certain colloquialisms, certain local references, depending on where you're going to be. And it's at this point that I come on to the what. So the fourth section is, what are you actually going to say? And most people start with this question, that they work out what they want to say, they get that written down, and then we kind of have to go back through the other bits and we end up rewriting it. I would always rather do something once rather than 5 times, which is why I go through those other 3 questions first. So once I then actually sit down, or I go for a run, go for a walk, and start working out what I'm actually going to say, I'm doing that from a place where I'm very clear who my audience is, why I'm delivering the speech, and where that speech is going to be delivered. So with those things in mind, it's then much easier for me to be able to write a speech that works. I'm going to hang everything I say off those key messages. There's something called the Fripp model, which I would highly recommend you Googling. You can download PDF or a Word document. It's from a woman called Patricia Fripp, and she's planned it out as roughly a 45-minute to an hour's keynote, but the model can work for speeches of all different lengths. And the main frame of that model is that you have your key message, you make a point to back it up, you expand on that point, you come back to another point to back up your key message, you expand on that, come back to another key point, expand on that, and then you close. Okay, so think about how you're going to open it, what's going to immediately engage your particular audience to your particular message. Think about what your key points are going to be that back up that key message. Okay, there's going to be nothing in here that doesn't add to our key message. We can expand on it, we can add anecdotes, we can add stories, we can add facts, we can do all of that stuff, but only if it gets our key message across. Otherwise, cut it out. We're not going to bother with it. This speech is not the right time for that story or that set of facts. And then think about how you're going to close. Make sure it's, again, is reinforcing that key message. It's your last chance to speak to somebody. So make sure you get that final bit in. If you are going to take Q&A as part of your speech, do your Q&A and then come back and close, okay? You don't want the last thing that your audience hears to be somebody else's question, okay? Make sure you close that speech, that final bit comes from you. And then the final question is the how, and this is all about how we deliver. So because we know what we're saying, why we're saying it, what the environment's going to be, we're in quite a good place to understand how we want to deliver it. So as a rule of thumb, small room, small gestures, big room, big gestures, okay? You want to be able to be seen from the back of the room, you're going to need those huge gestures. That's going to feel weird if you're just sitting around a table from somebody. There is a lot of work you can do around stagecraft in terms of that movement across the stage if you have a big stage, and that's right. That's going to be quite difficult to demonstrate online, but the same kind of principles apply. Okay, if you've got a big stage and you can use it, then do, but make sure it's purposeful movements. Okay, we don't want to be wandering up and down, we don't want to be turning round, we never want to turn our back on the audience. So making sure that it's deliberate movements, making sure that we maintain eye contact with the audience, make sure that your gestures have purpose to them, that we're not just waving our arms around. Men in particular, because you get pockets more often than we do, don't put your hands in your pockets. If you're going to put your hands in your pockets, stitch them together. Okay, make sure that you can't just drop your hands in your pockets. One interesting fact, which again comes back to this idea that our brains have not developed at the same speed as society has, is that we still put a lot of importance on being able to see hands. Okay, it's the reptile bit of our brain. If I'm hiding my hands, subconsciously your brain is wondering where my hands are. Is it a concealed threat? Okay, so palms open, facing the audience. It looks a little jazz handy when you first do it, but just keeping those nice open gestures. Okay, we don't want a barrier between us and the audience. I want you to be able to see that I'm nice, non-threatening. You can see my hands. I'm not suddenly going to attack you out of the blue. If you wear jewellery, make sure it's something that isn't going to distract you. Don't have a necklace that you can play with. If hair down means you play with your hair, tie your hair up out the way. Take those distractions, those fiddly things away from you. Make sure you have a good, clear stance. Okay, so feet underneath the hips. I want to be able to like rock slightly side to side without losing my balance. That's a good test that you've got a solid base. If that's difficult for you in heels, wear flats. If you're totally comfortable and you've got a great pair of heels that you want to wear on stage, absolutely fine. Just make sure that you're completely comfortable on there. You see a lot of people when they're nervous will rock from one foot to the other. It just turns us all off balance. It takes that kind of confident stance away from us. So nice firmly planted feet, hip width apart, shoulders back, looking out to the audience, bringing that real confident stance with us as we look out into the audience. And then if you do move, you're going to move and then you're going to plant your feet again. Okay, so we're not just wobbling about, it's clear, defined movements. Don't feel that you have to move. Plenty of speeches are just given from one standpoint. So if you've got a nice, firm, confident stance, you can use your gestures. Think about how you use your voice as well, okay? So I'm going to come on to it a little bit in the next slide, but the way that you use your voice is really important. And actually, the good news is you know a lot of this already. And the way that we speak to people naturally, our voices change in pitch and in pace, depending on what it is that we're saying. That's part of how we show emotion. It's part of how you can understand what I'm saying, even without being able to hear the words. But when we're nervous and we're in public speaking mode, that can go away. And suddenly I'm saying something that I've memorised, I'm trying to do it in a really calm, efficient way, and it's just dull. Okay, it becomes really monotone. You lose all that personality and all that energy. So it's not having to learn something new, it's actually just going back to what you do naturally and trusting that some of that will come through. So hopefully those 5 key questions, okay? Who, why, where, what, how. 5 really quick, easy questions that you can run through as you start to develop a speech. And then this is the online, offline section. We are living in a world at the moment where the vast majority of stuff that we're doing is completely online. We're in a pandemic, we're starting to open up a little bit, but we are not back to normal events. We're not back being able to have auditoriums full of people. A lot of offices aren't even back to having team meetings and boardrooms actually all sitting in the same room together, which means that you will almost certainly be doing a chunk of this presenting online. What I think we will start to see a lot of over the next few months is a blended delivery, which means you may have a live audience in front of you that's socially distanced within the room, but you will also be live streamed and recorded to send out to the audience who aren't physically there. So you kind of then need to do this job of having an eye on both audiences, that it works for the people who are in the room, you've got your eye contact, you've got some kind of response coming from there, but it also needs to make sense for somebody who's watching it who isn't in the room or is potentially watching it back later. Some things are exactly the same, so I'm not going to run through all of those. I just want to pick up on a few key differences. The first is that if you're doing something online and your audience isn't there, you can't bounce off their responses. So be clearer. Try and make sure that you explain things in a very clear way, because they won't have the option of waving their hand and asking a question necessarily, or they might be typing in a chat box and you won't see it until you've already moved on from that point. So the clearer that you can be, the better. If you're doing something that you want to be entertaining, you're not necessarily going to be able to see whether people find that funny or not. So maybe rein it back a little bit, because you can't rely on that being there. So take the edge off it a little bit, play it a little bit safer, because you won't be able to see your audience's response. Your voice becomes more important, because you don't have the same gestures, the same ability to move around the room. Your voice will become more important. So when I mentioned about it becoming monotone, if it's a very monotone presentation and a slideshow and that is it, you will lose your audience much quicker than you will if they're in the room with you. Okay, so think about, do you want to be really hi, 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 or do you want to be low, low, low? Do you want that really quick speed, or do you want to take it really, really slow? And when you do it like that, it sounds a little bit cartoonish, and you're thinking, well, when would I want to do either of those things? But if you just imagine you get a phone call and somebody is going to give you either good or bad news, think about what their voice sounds like. You know if that's good or bad news before they actually get to the point, okay? Are they really excited? How are you doing? Have you had a good day? You know that something quite exciting is going to come after that. If someone phones you and they're like, hi, how are you doing? How's your day been so far? You're probably a little bit cautious as to what's coming next, okay? Why are they not sounding very excited? So getting that bit of emotion in there. If you're talking about something that's really exciting, you're selling a product and you want to engender enthusiasm about it, sound enthusiastic about it, make sure that comes across in your voice, that real sense of excitement. If you're wanting to impress upon your audience the seriousness of something, if I'm potentially from a charity and I want you to understand just how bad this situation is, then you need to be able to hear that in my voice. So it comes down to those natural cues, but just be more aware of them online, because so much more of it will rely on your voice, because they won't have that same physical presence. Also be aware that when something's online, it may be being watched back. So if things are kind of time sensitive, make sure you put that it's like as of the time that I'm recording it, which is in this particular section. So when I spoke about, we're in a pandemic and we're at the point of coming out of this, and this is what I think's coming on, I might be totally wrong. If somebody's watching this in 6 months' time, they might look back and be like, oh yeah, pandemic, remember that, everything's totally back to normal now. Or they might be watching it back being like, we're still in lockdown, we're not seeing anybody face to face. So just being aware that if we're talking about something that's particular to the time it's been recorded, make that clear, because it won't necessarily be the case at the time that somebody watches that back, where if they're in the room with you, we all know exactly what's going on around us. The personality types do come through a little bit here. You will tend to find extroverts will do better in front of live audiences. I'm very much an extrovert. I get my energy from being around other people. I could talk to a room full of people all day quite happily, and I would come out buzzing and full of energy. Talking to a screen with no feedback, I find much more difficult. An introvert might actually quite like this, okay? This might actually help because I can record something, I can watch it back, I can do a couple of edits on it, I can get this polished presentation, I can send it out, and I've done that in a space where I get all my energy from, okay? I'm not being drained by having to perform in front of other people. So it's not necessarily a positive or negative, it's just something to be aware of when you're delivering. And as I say, I do think we will be moving into a much more blended world of events, training, public speaking. So you will probably have to be dealing with both audiences at the same time. So finally then, visibility is your superpower, okay, so please use it. I mentioned this in the personal branding section, but I come across so many amazing people and amazing organisations, and I think, why have I never seen you speak? Why have I never seen you on stage? Why haven't I heard these things before? And a lot of it is the nerves just get the better of us and we say no to those opportunities. So you've got a story to tell. Everybody has a story to tell, okay, whether it's you personally, whether it's your business, whether it's a product, like you've got something to share with the world. So take advantage of those opportunities to go out and tell people about these things. I know it sounds terrifying, so find safe spaces first, okay? Join organisations, make informal groups of people where you'll bounce ideas off each other, you'll practice presenting on different things to each other so that you start to feel more confident. Take advantage of training when it's there. There are organisations that will offer bursaries for training to enable speakers from different backgrounds to come through. There are lots of organisers who will offer a bit of coaching support. When I've decided that I want people to speak for me, and sometimes they try and say no because they're nervous and they don't want to be on stage, I will kind of persuade them out of that and be like, right, you're in, I'm not letting you out of this, but I'll sit down with you beforehand, we'll run through the questions, we'll do a practice run, because I know I want that person on stage at my event, I know I want that person on my panel discussion, so I will quite happily work with them to a point where they're confident to do that. And so far, they've all been brilliant at that point. It's totally worth my investment and time in doing that. And then look for opportunities where you can continue to do that. So it might be that you just record something and you put it out on the internet. It might be that you look for panel opportunities. It might be that you look for people who are looking for keynote speakers. So find where you can become more visible and practice. Get out there, keep doing it. It will become easier, it will become more natural, and hopefully you might even start to really enjoy it. So please do keep in touch. I've got my Twitter, my email and my LinkedIn there for you. Please get in touch. Let me know how you found this video. Let me know if there were some tips that were useful, if there's any other questions that you'd like to run through. Elevate Greater Manchester is a business development consultancy. I will always have opportunities for people to come and speak, whether that's in webinars, panels, interviews, Q&As, all kinds of different things. And I don't mind how nervous you are, okay? I will work with you if you've got a story that you want to share. So get in touch, tell me what it is that you want to share, tell me what kind of speaking opportunities you'll be looking for, and if there's a way that we can fit you into our programme events, then we will absolutely do that. So thank you ever so much for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope we will see you for the final networking session. Thank you very much.